The shadow in the crosshairs. Gotham City's rain is relentless, drumming against the rooftop where I crouched, shrouded in a shadow darker than the night itself. The city never sleeps. It moans, shivers, and bleeds. Tonight was no different. The screams had stopped, but the blood hadn't finished drying. The warehouse district beckoned like a phantom limb, a ghost of something gone terribly wrong. The body count was already 3 by the time I arrived. 2 thugs from the Volkman Syndicate and 1 civilian, an unfortunate cab driver in the wrong place at the wrong time. The cab's windshield was a spiderweb of shattered glass. Bullet entry. Judging by the angle and entry point, the shooter had been perched high above. Perhaps on the adjacent building. They were a professional. Methodical. But what stood out wasn't the precision, it was the aftermath. I approached cautiously, the cowl's detective lenses scanning. Blood spatter analysis suggested immediate incapacitation with no struggle. 1 shot each. Executed, Alfred, I muttered into the comms.
Yes, Master Wayne.
Something doesn't fit the pattern. These aren't Gotham's usual players. This wasn't Penguin's crew or Black Mask. Someone else has rolled into town.
I've tapped into GCPD dispatch. Lieutenant Gordon reports no witnesses and no intel so far. Shall I run ballistics analysis with the Bat computer?
I crouched over the bullet-ridden cab. Not yet. I need better context before we build a profile. But, Alfred, I don't recognize this work. It's too clean. It's not Joker, Riddler, or any of the usual suspects. Whoever this is. I trailed off. Something caught my eye. A tiny, barely discernible skull symbol carved into the shell casing that had rolled near the cab's tire. The symbol was Spartan but deliberate, etched into the surface with precision.
Find anything, sir?
I picked up the casing, holding it to the light. Whoever this shooter is, they're leaving a signature. Send this into the database. Expand beyond Gotham. Cross-reference.
As you wish. Checking now.
I slipped the casing into a compartment on my utility belt and paused to scan the rooftop across from the scene. It had the perfect vantage point for the killings. My grappling hook carried me through the biting wind to the opposite building. I landed silently, boots pressing against wet gravel. Sure enough, I found scuff marks where the shooter had knelt, the faint outline of a rifle bipod still visible in the residue. But my attention snapped to something else, a small notebook. Left partially buried beneath a piece of tarp. Almost imperceptible. A mistake or a deliberate clue. I opened the notebook, careful to preserve any remaining fingerprints. The pages were covered in shorthand notes. Lists of names. The Volkman Syndicate members were circled in red. Next to each name were dates, locations, and my blood surged, skull symbols identical to the one on the bullet casing. Someone had declared war on Gotham's criminals, and it seemed personal. Before I could study further, a faint whiff of cigarette smoke reached my nose. Someone was here. I spun, but the rooftop was empty. The rain distorted vision and sound, yet I swore I'd heard the faint crunch of a boot over gravel. My body tensed, ready for a fight, and then I saw it. Across the rooftops. A figure. All black. Military tactical gear. A distinctive white skull painted across his chest. He hadn't even tried to mask himself. He wanted me to see him. I acted without hesitation, firing my grappling hook toward his position. But by the time I landed, the figure was gone, replaced only by the faint echo of a low voice carried away by the storm. Alfred, have you found anything on the skull insignia? I asked hours later, back in the Batcave. Alfred's face appeared on the massive Bat computer screen, his expression thoughtful.
Quite. The skull seems to be associated with an individual who calls himself the Punisher. He's highly active in New York City. The news media has labeled him a vigilante, though his methods are, shall we say, more permanent than your own.
I narrowed my eyes. Permanent? You mean he kills?
Precisely. His targets tend to involve organized crime syndicates, drug cartels, and those connected with human trafficking. From all accounts, he's extraordinarily precise, trained likely in special operations or military black ops. However, the man himself seems to have no superhuman abilities, just exceptional resourcefulness, tactical knowledge, and firearm expertise.
And Gotham's caught his attention, I muttered under my breath. Why leave New York?
That remains unclear, sir, although
Alfred paused, typing something off screen.
there have been whispers that the Wachmann Syndicate recently acquired control over several arms shipments originating from the East Coast. If this Punisher fellow views them as a threat, it makes sense he'd follow the trail here.
My jaw tightened. Vigilantes were messy. They escalated conflict instead of resolving it. Whatever his motives, this Punisher was an outsider. He wouldn't understand Gotham's fragile balance, the chaos it teetered on every second. I had to get to him before his actions burned the entire city. The next night, I pieced together his movements. The list in a notebook had 8 more names, all clearly associated with the Syndicate. By pattern, the next logical target was Max Heller, a weapons supplier operating out of the Slaughterhouse District. I reached the industrial docks a half hour ahead of Heller's planned meeting, taking up position in the rafters of the rusted warehouse he used as a safe house. I didn't have to wait long. Heller arrived with 2 goons in tow. They were jittery, scanning every dark corner with flashlights. They knew someone was hunting them but hadn't yet connected the dots. Minutes passed. Silence settled like a suffocating fog, and then I saw him. The Punisher emerged from the shadows, rifles slung against his back, 2 silenced handguns drawn. He moved with chilling efficiency, a hunter among sheep. I dropped down between him and Heller before he could act. "I don't know who you think you are," I said, my voice low and commanding, "but this ends now." The Punisher didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed beneath the glossy sheen of rainwater running down his face.
"Batman, figures you'd show up."
"And you are?" I challenged. "A man who gets the job done," he replied, voice like gravel.
"Step aside. You don't know what these men have done. You don't understand."
"I understand Gotham doesn't need more blood," I said firmly. He tilted his head, almost amused.
Gotham City is a cesspool because you let it be. You let them live. Scum like this, you lock them up, and they're back on the streets in a week. I don't make that mistake.
Heller's goons took advantage of our standoff. They bolted. Without missing a beat, the Punisher raised one of his handguns to take them down. I reacted faster, flinging a batarang to knock the weapon from his hand. No killing. He moved like lightning, switching to his backup weapon and lunging for a firing position. I intercepted, using counter-grapples and disarming techniques I had perfected over years of fighting. He was good, better than most, but battles of precision like this suited me. The fight was brutal and relentless. His movements were military, trained, calculated, and aggressive. He fought to kill, aiming for quick takedowns. It took everything I had to match him without pushing things too far. Finally, I sent an electric shock through my gauntlet, stunning him long enough to pin him against one of the warehouse's rusted beams. Enough. I growled, but his gaze didn't waver, and to my surprise, he laughed.
"You think this changes anything?"
He muttered.
"I'll find the others. This city might love you for what you don't do, but they need me for what I will."
Heller had escaped. I could hear the cab screeching away in the alley outside. "Who are you?" I demanded.
"Frank Castle.
He admitted, jaw clenched.
Remember that name the next time Gotham scum slips through your fingers. The Punisher doesn't leave loose ends."
He threw something, a flashbang grenade that erupted in light and sound. By the time I could see again, he was gone. Later that night, I reviewed the interrogation footage I'd retrieved from Heller's goons. They splintered under questioning, revealing how the Wachmann Syndicate had been importing experimental weapons. The twist? Their operations had been feeding into a larger arms trade, with some of the shipments ending up in Black Mask's hands. The Punisher wasn't just hunting names on old grudges. He was dismantling a network. Still, his methods made him a wild card, one Gotham could not afford. "Alfred," I said, turning toward the Batcomputer's glowing screen, "trace every connection between Frank Castle and the Syndicate." The more I know, the sooner I can end this shadow war he started.
Yes, sir.
Alfred replied, though his voice carried a rare note of unease. As I stared at the skull insignia, glowing stark and unyielding on the display, one thing was clear. Frank Castle saw only black and white, but in Gotham, everything was gray.